Hi, I'm Marty Nemko. Even some brilliant people suffer professionally and personally from the lack of a likable personality. And some such people don't care. I don't want to play those games. But if you do care, as the classic book said, to win friends and influence people, without sacrificing and maybe even enhancing your integrity, maybe one or more of these tips are going to help. First, let's talk a bit about eye contact. Look the person in the eye maybe a half to 3/4 of the time. More than that can feel creepy. To get in the habit, early in a conversation, note the person's eye color. Turning to posture. We ridicule the past's deportment school, in which people were trained into good posture by walking with a book on their head, shoulders back, back straight, head facing straight ahead, while somehow managing to look relaxed. But shallow lookist species that we are, the person with said posture is generally viewed more as more likable. That is viewed as more likable. Body language. In a two-person conversation, stand not face to face, but at a roughly 30-degree angle. That will enable you to connect, but it's not confrontational. So if I'm turning like this, but I'm looking at you, it's less head-on. It's less confrontational. Of course, if you know the person well, head-on is fine. Also avoid crossing your arms. That distances you from the person. Aim for balance in conversation, not self-absorption. Older people tend to criticize Gen Zers and millennials as self-absorbed. I myself don't see a generational difference. Most people of all ages tend to be self-absorbed. I'm not encouraging self-abnegation, just balance. As Rabbi Hillel said, if I'm not for myself, who will be? But if I'm only for myself, what am I? Achieve, but usually without making others feel less than. Most people are powerfully motivated to not feel inferior or embarrassed. So while of course strive and achieve, the benefit of sharing achievements with others, for example, impressing your boss, need be weighed against the risk of antipathy. What a show-off. Boy, he's just masking his internal feeling that he's a loser. Show moderate confidence. Rarely will you want to exude pervasive self-doubt. For example, the aforementioned, I'm such a loser. On the other hand, demonstrating lofty self-confidence will too often be seen as not credible or make the other person feel inferior, which, as I mentioned, usually causes antipathy, if not retribution. As with most things, moderation is usually right. When you're confident about an assertion, it's okay to say, for example, I'm pretty sure this is wise, but what do you think? And when you're not confident, it's okay to say, for example, I'm just not a good public speaker. Despite trying, my talks are too discursive, and if I script them, they're sterile. Get this fixed. Okay. Judge, but usually without expressing it. It's absurd that we denigrate people for being judgmental. After all, discernment is core to good decision-making. What to buy, whom to vote for, who to donate to, who to hire, who to befriend. But the wise person consciously decides whether to voice judgment, especially about your conversation partner. Let's say you think your conversation partner's self-confidence wildly exceeds his or her competence. You've got to weigh the advantages of shaking the person from undue complacency against the likelihood of resentment, even retaliation. Default toward the positive. Many Europeans look down on Americans' insistence on optimism over realism. But when in Rome, do as the Romans do, or should I say, when in America, do as the Americans do. Of course there are times to be negative and to criticize. Even in the U.S., people roll their eyes at Miss America Pollyannism, and improvement does come mainly from suggestions for improvement. But when the ratio of your negative to positive comments exceeds 1-to-1, you do risk being less well-liked. Default to a pleasant expression. This is a corollary of the previous item. Of course, the plastered, exaggerated, contextually inappropriate salesman smile is, let's say it's worthy of having an eye roll. But if wearing mild pleasantness on your face doesn't come naturally, it may be worth the effort to make that your default and to look for opportunities to legitimately smile. Use moderate speaking pace, volume, pitch, and use of hands. We claim to celebrate diversity, but often it's not true, including regarding comportment. People who speak more quickly or slowly than average are generally disliked. Same with volume, use of hands, and pitch. Of course, you have only modest control over your voice's pitch, but aim for the bottom of your voice's natural range. No, don't sound gravelly to sound low. Active listen. Avoid the trap of not listening, mainly waiting for the person to shut up so you can spout your pearls. As we listen, we all think ahead, and that's okay. But try to really listen to what your conversation partner is saying, noting what, if any, emotion is behind it. Ask questions. This is a corollary of the previous item. In listening, be curious. Might there be a follow-up you want to ask? You see, asking is flattering, and you might even learn something. Of course, in initiating conversation, you also could do worse than to begin with a question. For example, what are you thinking about these days? Or anything coming up that you're looking forward to? Later in the conversation, when you feel you can deepen that conversation, you might ask something like, it's quite probing, do you have any regrets about something specific that they did, or even about their life in general? Use the 30-50 rule. On average, talk 30 to 50% of the time, allowing the other person 50 to 70. Of course, that's going to vary with how much you, compared with the other person, have to say of value on that topic at hand. Of course, a small percentage of people in some situations would rather listen more than 70% of the time, in which case you could get to even 80, but such situations are rare. Use the traffic light rule. I have to admit this is probably what my clients say is the most valuable tip I've given. Many of them say that's the most often cited as my most useful tip. During the first 30 seconds of an utterance, your light's green. The person's listening, not waiting for you to shut up so he or she can say something, nor thinking that you're long-winded. During the next 30 seconds, your light's yellow. And at the 60-second mark, unless you're telling a compelling anecdote and see that your conversation is fully engaged, your light's red. You better shut up or ask a question. If the person wants to know more, he or she can ask. Take a nuanced approach to interrupting. The often urged, never interrupt, lacks nuance. Yes, default to not interrupting, but long-winded people impose too much frustration on you to put up with. You have a right to get your needs met and thus to interrupt, because they're being long-winded or because you're afraid you might forget the important thing you'd like to say. Of course, in a business meeting, you could simply jot it down so you won't forget it. Also, some people like an interruptive conversation style, in which you understand each other's points before they're fully verbalized. Yet another justification for interrupting is when your conversation partner knows that he or she tends to be discursive and welcomes your reining him or her in. Use the 1-second pause. Most people welcome your pausing for a second before you respond. That shows that not only are you polite in not interrupting, but that their statement or question is important enough to warrant reflection before you respond. Again, there are exceptions. Some people, indeed some cultures, and New York Jews and Israelis come to mind, prefer rapid-fire exchanges. The appropriate use of physical touching. Physical touch can be powerful and endearing, but in today's Me Too era, men must be especially circumspect in deciding whether to touch a female. But even men may be wise to, as appropriate, use clearly not sexual touching. For example, a 1-second touch on the forearm when you're offering reassurance. Keep your head in the clouds, feet on the ground. People who frequently propose lofty, unrealistic ideas are often dismissed. On the other hand, relentless focus on the high probability practical is often seen as excessively sober. As with many things, a measure of balance is usually required. If you naturally default to big, if potentially unrealistic ideas, espouse them, but temper by acknowledging challenges. If you naturally default to the pragmatic, it couldn't hurt to at least occasionally propose higher risk but exciting new possibilities. Learn to work a room. Arrive early. Scope out a person or a group that feels appealing, but beware of the tendency to focus on people of our own race, gender, and age. Approach the person or group with what I call an environmental comment. No, it's not about climate change, but about the meeting, the room, the speaker, and so on. And then ask a door-opening question such as, is this your first time at these meetings? Or, have you heard the speaker? Then slowly deepen the conversation by responding to their statements with a bit of personal revelation, and then asking a question that might unearth something they care about, such as those in the Ask Questions section that I mentioned earlier, like, is there something you're looking forward to this week? Do not so random acts of kindness. The old saw that it feels better to give than receive tends to be true. When we give, we feel generous, grateful that we have enough to be able to give, and often as a bonus, we get appreciation. So, whether it's putting a quarter into a stranger's parking meter just when the meter maid's about to give a ticket, or something with more selfish potential benefit, like offering to help your boss with something outside of your required responsibilities, think about doing random and perhaps especially not random acts of kindness. And finally, retain foundational authenticity. Despite all these rules of the relationship road, plenty of room remains for individuality. If your core self is intellectual or emotion-centered, humorous or serious, intense or laid back, introverted or extroverted, honor that. You ultimately will be better liked and feel better about yourself if you are authentic in showing your foundational personality. In any case, I would welcome you down there below giving a thumbs up, or if you feel the need, a thumbs down, just be honest. Also, comments are welcome, and certainly down there it allows you to share on your social media if you deem appropriate. In any event, I do thank you for watching. I am Marty Nemko.